Fighting rages across Ukraine as Russia's ruble crumbles amid crippling global sanctions. Will Russia's attack on Ukraine be a turning point for Europe? I'll break it all down here on Straight Talk. Hello and welcome to Straight Talk. I'm Ludovica Brignola. Scenes of destroyed Russian tanks and a Ukrainian population vowing to fight on has mobilized the world against Moscow. Russia's President Vladimir Putin is finding his country increasingly isolated as dozens of countries impose flight restrictions and export bans. After several Russian banks were removed from the SWIFT network, which facilitates global financial transactions, the ruble crashed to record lows against the US dollar. How long can this situation hold? Hadia Al-Alawi reports.
It's the biggest assault on a European country since World War II. The Russian military is facing tougher than expected resistance from Ukraine as NATO allies throw their collective support behind Kiev. Berlin is supplying 1,000 anti-tank weapons and 500 missiles, U-turning on its ban of weapon exports to conflict zones. France and the Netherlands are also sending hundreds of pieces of military equipment, and Washington has pledged $350 million worth of weapons and other defensive supplies.
Now I'm authorizing additional U.S. force capabilities to deploy to Germany as part of NATO's response, including some of the U.S.-based forces that the Department of Defense placed on standby weeks ago.
Russia's assault on Ukraine has also prompted severe sanctions from the West, and their effects have been quickly felt. President Putin and his Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov's assets were frozen, and a travel ban to the US was imposed. Governments and corporations announced divestments of Russian assets, and some banks have been excluded from the international SWIFT payments system, described as the backbone of international finance. When the markets opened on Monday, the ruble's value dropped by as much as 40%, prompting the Russian central bank to more than double interest rates. For Turkey, the conflict presents a unique set of challenges. Over the past few years, it has enjoyed close defense and political ties with both countries. It purchased S-400 missiles from Russia and sold sophisticated drones to Ukraine while agreeing to co-produce more. It's also in a strategic location presiding over the Bosphorus and Dardanelles Straits, which provide the only sea route in and out of the Black Sea. Defense Minister Hulusi Akar said on Tuesday that Turkey would use its powers under the Montreal Agreement, which governs passage of the Turkish Straits. During times of war, Turkey can choose to limit the passage of naval vessels. It followed a statement from the foreign minister on Sunday in which he acknowledged that Russia's actions constituted war.
In the beginning, it was a Russian attack, and we evaluated it with experts, soldiers, and lawyers. Now it has turned into a war. This is not a military operation. It is officially a state of war.
According to the UN, more than 300,000 Ukrainians have fled to neighboring countries. $20 million in additional humanitarian aid has been allocated by the organization, as Europe races for one of its worst humanitarian crises in years. Hadia Al-Alawi, Straight Talk.
And to discuss the consequences of Russia's attack on Ukraine, joining me now from Washington, D.C. is Rich Outzen. He is a former US diplomat. From Istanbul, Mitat Celikpala is a professor of international relations at Kadir University. And from Innsbruck, Austria, Klaus Jurgens. He is a political analyst and journalist. Gentlemen, many thanks for being with us today. Rich, I'd like to start with you. Dozens of countries have imposed severe sanctions that have sent the ruble into a tailspin, as an immediate effect. First of all, what is the real impact, though, that you expect these sanctions to have on Russia in the medium term?
Well, that's a great way to frame the question, because they're not a short-term solution. The truth is, Russia has been subject to sanctions for decades now, and they've built up some resistance mechanisms, including a huge reserve of foreign currency. So even with the drop of the ruble, they have some buffer. The scope and size of these sanctions is virtually unprecedented, with even the Swiss jumping on. So you have individual companies, international organizations, broad range, people pouring out vodka in bars across Europe and the United States. This is going to squeeze, and it's going to hurt Russia. But Russia thinks it can perhaps get its military operations done and then negotiate back for the relief of some of these sanctions. So it's a race between pain and gain.
Interesting. Klaus, do you agree with that? Rich was talking about a resistance mechanism that Russia's put in place. In a way, it's managed to insulate itself. And I'd also like to ask you, to what extent will these sanctions have an impact on the citizens in Russia rather than on the government, really, because it's managed to successfully insulate itself?
Well, that is indeed the question. Normally, sanctions always are disadvantageous for the ordinary citizen. Now, this time it might be different because it is not only sanctions which actually will take place in Russia, but they will affect many people who live abroad. Some even start to say that the children of Russian expatriates going to school in the United Kingdom should be refused any extension of their school or student visa. Now, I am never certain whether sanctions are really the best option. Only the other day I said we should all aim for one last time, perhaps, just this once, to see whether diplomacy works. Because sanctions may not work today. They may not work tomorrow. They will work 1 week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks later, if at all. And until then, further bloodshed, innocent lives might be lost during this time. I think everyone who is involved must immediately come to terms with it. Let's talk, let's try to end the invasion and do something, but not only hoping, yes, sometime in the near to midterm future, the sanctions will work regardless of ordinary citizens or the rich and wealthy people. And by that time, this unbelievable suffering of the people of Ukraine would have continued.
Rich, what are the practical implications of this exclusion from the SWIFT payment system? I mean, we know that in 2020, Russia alone accounted for 1.5% of SWIFT transactions. But I mean, are there any alternatives to SWIFT? First of all, is it going to be effective?
Well, it will, as I talked about this balance between pain and gain, it will be effective, again, in the medium term, as my colleague has pointed out. We need to not just think, though, about how to stop the fighting. That's primarily a matter for Ukrainian fighters and NATO countries providing resupply, because Russia will not stop as a result of diplomacy. They will stop as a result of either victory or defeat, and that has to be achieved on the battlefield. Now, what happens after that is the negotiation, and that's where SWIFT is important, because and there are ways to get around SWIFT. Iran has been banned from SWIFT transactions for several years. Countries like China, Venezuela, and Iran will trade with Russia outside the SWIFT system. However, it will have a huge decreasing impact or decreasing the volume of transactions Russia can do with Europe and other trade partners. It will add cost. So when the fighting is done, and then the question is Putin allowed to keep some of what he's taken? Is he forced to totally pull out? Does Ukraine retain its sovereignty? These things will rely, not just the battlefield, but this negotiation on the financial pressure. And that's where SWIFT will cause the most pain, because it will mount over time.
Clear. And now let's speak about the attack in itself, because Mitat, one of the aspects that has emerged from the first few days of this attack has been the unexpected resilience of Ukrainian forces. To what extent have Turkish drones played a role and continue playing a role in light of what we are seeing now?
We see some shootings, in fact, last couple of days, how the Ukrainians are successful to utilize or use those drones against Russian columns or military convoys. It's very important, most probably, and it is a kind of a solidarity. As the other previous speakers mentioned, and the Western actors are showing a kind of a massive solidarity against Russia, in fact, together with Ukraine. And this is one of the signs that Turkish drones are very effectively contributing the Ukrainian resistance. And, you know, if we remember what happened in Azerbaijan on Nagorno-Karabakh and then Libya, it seems that Turkish drones are very effective tools in the hands of all those armies against some conventional armies. Therefore, we see those shootings, but most probably at the end of the conflict or a little bit later on, we will see the real effects and results of this success much, clearer way.
Right, Mitat, and Turkish Foreign Minister Mevlut Çavuşoğlu has called the situation in Ukraine war for the first time. He's also pledged to implement parts of the 1936 Montreal Convention that would potentially limit transit of warships from entering the Black Sea. Turkey's president also released a statement about the convention. Let's take a listen.
Montreux Sözleşmesi'nin
We've decided to use the authority given to us by the Montreal Convention to de-escalate the situation. As we always say, the sovereignty, political unity, and territorial integrity of Ukraine should be respected. We see Russia's attack on Ukraine as unacceptable, and we appreciate the fight the Ukrainian people and administration have had.
Mitat, what does it mean, and how will they act, in your opinion?
And this is the real aspect of Turkish involvement in this issue. You know, with Russia's invasion of Ukraine, war has broken out between two of Turkey's partners to the north across the Black Sea. And Turkey had been actively pursuing a diplomatic solution to forestall a conflict and applying the Montreal Convention's Articles 19, 20, and 21 is an important development from my side. As I said, with this decision, and Turkey accepts the conflict as a war, and as a war, try to control the region. And as you said, the Montreal Convention of 1936 regulates the passage of warships through the straits and gives Turkey complete control of the region. And Turkey now prevents any actor to enter the Black Sea in order to decrease the possibilities of clashes between the different actors. And not only controlling riparian states, I mean Ukraine and warring states, Ukraine and Russia, it stops the flow of all those ships into the Black Sea and from the Black Sea to out. Therefore, it's a kind of a move to control the flow of military equipment to the region, and therefore this is the case that Turkey is actively supporting the peace initiatives in the Black Sea region.
Right, Mitat, it is a very big development indeed, but we've seen huge developments as well in Europe because the bloc has essentially made a historic U-turn in its post-war history, given that it said it will supply arms to a country at this point. Klaus, what is this signaling?
Yes, I may play devil's advocate here, but I have actually two conflicting viewpoints about it. If I may start with the first, you may be surprised. Now, it is not for the first time that leaders in Brussels or in the European Union capitals actually try to influence politics in Ukraine. Let us all go back a few years and the elections when it was made very clear that a pro-Western sentiment would be favored by Brussels and that future leaders should distance themselves more from Russian influence. Now, this was peacetime. This was something completely different. Now, I am not surprised that there is a united EU front against the invasion. Actually, Vladimir Putin plays very well into the hands of the European federalists who always proposed a further eastward expansion, discreetly overlooking Turkey and the southeast, of course. So this is the one point I wanted to make. But secondly, yes, indeed, Europe tries to speak with one voice, was much faster than the United Kingdom after Brexit. And indeed, there is no European army. Now, what can the EU do? Yes, send protective gear, perhaps send weapons, allow weapons into Ukraine. But I would come back perhaps in a few minutes if there is still time. The role of NATO, according to me, will be much more significant than the role of the EU. But this is a point for discussion. This is, I guess, the program is all about. But there are two dimensions to the EU's united front as we see right now.
Interesting. And on this, I just want to show you a tweet from the German Chancellor, because he said we must put a stop to warmongers like Putin that require strength of our own. We want a strong, modern Bundeswehr, and we will spend over 2% of our economic output on ensuring it is suitably equipped. Yes, we fully intend to secure our freedom and our prosperity. Rich, has Putin, in a way, managed to wake up Europe and NATO, which Macron had defined a few years ago in 2019 as brain dead, and build a sort of united front, as Klaus was saying?
I think that's right. I heard someone comment the other day that it was shocking that Olaf Scholz would end up being, in geopolitical terms, a more consequential Chancellor of Germany than Angela Merkel. Just in his first year. And I think that it's sometimes not the man or the woman, it's the circumstance that comes to the fore. And look, this is, it's the end of the post-World War II security architecture in Europe. Russia no longer is sneaking around trying to revise things with little green men. It's open warfare. And this revives the main purpose for which NATO was created. After the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991, it was almost as if there was this residual military muscle, but really a search for what the purpose was. That purpose was out of area. It was in Afghanistan. But what Putin has done is he has reminded us of the fact that it is, in historical terms, at least for the last several centuries, natural for a power, authoritarian power in Eastern Europe to seek to expand. And NATO, as an alliance of Western nations, many of them small, who do not want to be conquered by an authoritarian neighbor, still has relevance and value. So I'm very encouraged by what I'm hearing from Berlin, better late than never. I'm very encouraged by the strong stances taken by the Poles and the Czechs and the Brits and many others. And I have to agree with my colleague here that in many ways, NATO's response is much more. EU is important. They have an important supplementary role. But the revival of NATO and NATO's strong ability to support deterrence and Ukrainian sovereignty is a real story here.
Right. Let's speak for a few minutes about another potentially very long-term problem that Europe, not only Europe, is going to face, as energy security. Because Germany and several other countries have resisted diversifying their energy resources, and they have relied on Russian gas for years. To give an idea, I mean, Germany relies for more than half of its gas output on Russia. What should Europe do? What steps should Europe take for its energy security? Mitat, on this.
It's an important thing. In fact, now Russian gas to Turkey and Europe is still flowing. Of course, we see a kind of a slowdown of gas through Nord Stream 1, and Nord Stream 2 is on the shelf now. But the flow of gas to Turkey is unabated. Neither the gas nor the price has been affected as yet by Russia's invasion on Ukraine, because it is the part of a long-term and recently concluded contract between Russia and Turkey. But depending on the attitude of Turkey and the other European actors against Russia, we may see some changes. We see the oil prices are increasing now. But, Europeans were planning to establish a kind of a new energy environment. This Green Deal issue, most probably Russian attitude will fasten a European attitude to move renewables and the other issues, as well as most probably we will see some new actors in the European energy security arena, like Iraq or Eastern Mediterranean. And therefore, we see some developments in the future, but not very quick response and new quick developments, because, this energy market is not that flexible, and it's not easy to re-establish such a kind of an infrastructure. But, as Rich mentioned, I don't know whether the SWIFT and trade sanctions will affect in the midterm on Russian influence or gas and oil trade with the Europeans.
Absolutely, very difficult problem there on energy security and all that's happening. But in Europe, there's also a potential for 7 million refugees arriving from Ukraine to Poland. In Poland, there are around 37 million people, so that would be a very significant number arriving into Poland. Is Europe ready for another refugee crisis? Klaus?
Well, it is very interesting. Think about the Austrian and the German rail services, the national rail services. They already said refugees from Ukraine could travel for free on the entire intercity network. Now, a number of very critical voices came here. Very, very interesting. You offer that overnight to Ukrainian refugees. But when the big migrant crisis started, with many, many other innocent people trying to reach European shores, you would not even consider this. Now, I think in a positive sense, this very, very sad, shocking invasion into Ukraine might help the European establishment to rethink its entire approach vis-à-vis people in need, people under distress, refugees, migrants. They might as well say, look, we have space, we have the absorption capacity, and we will actually be welcoming not only people from Ukraine this time, but in the future, other migrants, families, young people, old people, everyone who is fleeing from civil war, torture, prosecution, or any other heinous activity. This is my big hope.
Right. Turkey has sent several truckloads of humanitarian aid as well to Ukraine by land. Mitat, that's interesting because Ankara has close security ties with Moscow, a high trade volume as well. It's been a staunch supporter of Ukraine, though, during this crisis.
But, for Turkey, there are a couple of issues that are utmost important. Because, why Erdogan said we find military action unacceptable and reject it, it was the case for Turkey during the Crimean occupation as well. For Turkey, territorial integrity and sovereignty are sacred things. And we are living in the region that any kind of a change will affect Turkey's stability and any kind of relationship with its neighboring countries. Therefore, Russian aggression, despite the fact that Russians are the partners or even strategic partners to Turkey last couple of years, Turkey has a special relationship with Ukraine as well. And and we have following in Turkey that a kind of a cooperation mechanisms and regional ownership was the scheme for Turkey in any kind of developments in this region. But Russians are playing a hard card and high card against this policy, and at the end they ruined such a kind of a policy, which means it is the militarization of all over the region, and it's unacceptable for Turkey. This is the reason, most probably, Turkey is trying to balance the region and to stop the aggression, to bring the parties together to resolve those issues, depending on the international law and peace, tranquility, and of course, stability within the region.
Right, and one last point. I'm just going to stop you there. One last point, question for Rich. I mean, a very alarming point because Russian President Vladimir Putin's implied threat to turn the Ukraine attack into a broader nuclear conflict presents, obviously, President Joe Biden with choices rarely contemplated in the atomic age. I mean, how do you think Biden should respond to this?
Well, in Washington, the sense is that he should take note of it, maintain the relevant nuclear readiness posture, which we do and we always have, but not to take it more as political theater, if you will. This is not the first time a Russian or before them Soviet leader has tried to pound on the table with a shoe or a fist and threaten the use of nuclear weapons. We have many decades of experience with controlling escalation in that area, and frankly, Putin would not win an escalation based on the use of nuclear weapons. We'll just leave it at that. It would be a nightmare for Russia, for Europe, and the United States, but it would be the end of Putin. We don't think he's quite that dysfunctional. So I'm not saying we don't take it seriously at the level of rhetoric. It's a sign that he knows he is not getting what he wants in his military campaign, and it's something to keep an eye on. But we will be in the United States and in NATO prepared to deal with escalations across the entire ladder, as we always are.
Absolutely. Unfortunately, we have to end this here. Many thanks for being with us today. Rich Outzen, Mitat Celikpala and Klaus Jurgens. Many thanks. And that's all for this edition of Straight Talk with me, Ludovica Brignola. If you've got any comments, follow us and tweet us at Straight Talk TRT. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Until next time, take care and goodbye.